call Miss Nancy Waters. Thank her for attending service. You know, she's been coming. She was a member at Bethel for many, many years. And I said, well, I'm going to call Nancy and just tell her thank you. I'm glad she's been attending. And when I was on the phone with her, now y'all get this. I called her. We chit-chatted for a while, didn't we, Miss Nancy? And she said, can I tell you a story about the bell? That might not do anything for you, but I said, God, you are amazing. She said, can I tell you a story about the bell? I said, sure, Miss Nancy. And after she shared it with me, I said, why don't you just share that with the whole church tomorrow so they know the history of what we've got here. Miss Nancy, would you come up front? Y'all give her a big cheer as she comes. I'll tell you as she's coming, her father built the whole education wing. This is a special place for her. And he built that whole education wing, and now you tell them about the bell, okay?
I was a charter member of Bethel's nursery. And as Richard said, my dad was involved in building this sanctuary and the educational building, but also from day one, which was around in 1938, a few people began thinking about building a church on this property. And those people were mostly from the First Presbyterian Church downtown. And so a bunch of the local people got together, and my dad was a civil engineer at Eastman, and Eastman was buying up houses on Long Island and destroying them. And so what they did is that Daddy had an inn, and he said, okay, can we have the lumber? Can we have this? Can we have that? And so when the first service was held in September of 1939, they had a church to go to, a little white church. You've seen pictures of it around. It was located on what is now the educational building. And at that time, people were recovering from the Great Depression. Money was scarce, but building materials were even scarcer. However, we had a fellow by the name of Bradley Ward who left his home in Avery County, North Carolina, and came to work at Eastman. Well, Bradley had lots of family members who owned sawmills back in those mountains. So Bethel men we could buy the lumber and then trade it, buy more than was needed, and trade it for things like a keg of nails, or most important, and hardest to get, were cinder block. Anyway, that set a precedence, and so when the church was growing like leaps and bounds, like another church I can think about, they needed to expand that original building. America, of course, in that time period was at war, and any new construction had to be agreed to by the War Production Board in Knoxville. And so, but that was no problem. The men used the same way of doing things. They'd buy up lumber that they didn't need in Avery County and then trade it for the building materials they needed. And they expanded the little white church to have a fellowship hall and classrooms. Well, we were still growing then, and plans were made. An architect by the name of Bose, somebody, drew up the plans for this sanctuary and that building over there. And so, but the men still had that mindset. You try to get what you need any way you can. Well, both my parents were from Knoxville, and it seemed like we were going down every weekend, but I probably wasn't that often. But one day, going to Knoxville on the 11W, and back then it was just a 2-lane road, and I don't remember exactly where it was, but it was past Rogersville, but before Bean Station. My dad looked over to the left, and he saw a bell sitting in a pasture. Cows were ambling around the bell. Well, he got to thinking there was no one around to ask about, but it was kind of a thing for us to see if the bell was still there when we'd go to Knoxville. Well, one day, there was a guy plowing his field adjacent to that pasture. So, of course, Daddy stopped, asked the man if he knew anything about the bell. And he said, "No, I'm afraid I don't. I've heard that a church was there at one time, but I really don't know anything about it. But there is a family that's lived here forever." And he said, "It's up on that hill behind those trees." And so my dad, of course, went, knocked on the door. An elderly man came to the door, and Daddy said, "I'm interested in that bell." He said, "Well, that was our church. It was a little church that was built and my family attended, but we couldn't keep it going. And we tore it down, and people took what they needed, lumber, brick, whatever, cinder block, and but they didn't have a use for the bell. And so the bell was left in that pasture for I don't know how many years. And Daddy said, "Well, could I buy it from you?" And the man said, "I don't own it. I can't sell it to you, and I don't know anybody who could sell it to you. So if you want it, take it." And so my dad told him, said, "I'll be back with a couple of men and a pickup truck." And I think you all heard the end of that story this morning.
I want to say something. Richard's going to be like, "Oh, Lord." As Nancy was speaking yesterday, I was thinking about that, and when Richard came upstairs, he said, "Oh, have I got a story to tell you?" And Kathy and I were talking yesterday. We were in the church finishing up some of the things, and from the time that I walked in this church, and I know that many of you have experienced that same feeling, the love and the presence of God is present in this place. And if you'll think about just little tidbits of things, there was purpose, there was love, there was honor and meaning in every person's heart who played a part in the building, the foundation, the continuation of Bethel Presbyterian. And when we came here, you could feel that. And this property and this building has been dedicated to the Lord Almighty. And if you, I can't help but think yesterday when I went back to a comment that was on a post from the Christmas tree, and it caught me because it said that there was some other things that didn't seem like there was much thought put into, but this tree in the church's yard here seemed to have so much heart and so much thought was put into it. And that's the difference, because when we're honoring God, and He made a way. If you'll hear what Miss Nancy just shared, people were struggling. People had hard times. It was during the Great Depression. But they had a desire. They had a zeal to build a church in which to worship the Lord. And that's what we're doing here today. It's just like Eddie and Melissa, as they fill up that pew, they want to share the good news of Jesus, and that he is good, and that he can be your helper in every day and in every way. And that's what the building is for, because, you know, if we bring people in, they hear more about the Lord, so they can go out and share and minister to others. But I just wanted to share that, and I hope that's okay, Richard. But if you'll think about it, there is meaning and heart and love in every piece of wood, every glass, every part of the floor, every piece of furniture. That there was sacrifice, there was thought, there was hardship, but most of all, there was dedication to our Savior. And God is pleased with that. God is pleased with that. So as Richard comes, can we give the Lord a good hand clap of praise?